Hey everyone, I wanted to make a video today that although it might not be the most exciting thing to talk about in the world, I think it's one of the most important things to talk about, especially before you start gardening on a deck. Basically, I'm going to go over the ways that you can protect your deck from damage if you are going to start a container garden on it. Now, I think one of these things I'm going to talk about, I actually did before I started my garden, and then everything else I kind of learned along the way and wish I'd done it before. So if you do have a deck garden and you haven't done any of these things yet, definitely do it for this season. If you are just getting started, then get all this in place beforehand so that you don't damage your deck. Now, I do think in general, if you're gonna be using your deck as a container garden, there's probably gonna be a little bit of damage to it, but we want to reduce that as much as possible. So the very first thing, and the thing that I actually did beforehand, is figure out your deck capacity. So your deck capacity is the amount of weight that it's designed to hold. Typically, at least here in the United States, that's going to be calculated on pounds per square foot. So how many pounds was each square foot of your deck designed to hold? Now, let me say this. I am not a structural engineer. I'm not an architecture. I'm not really a wood expert of any kind, but I've at least learned these things so far along the way. So if I do say the wrong terms, let me know down below, but I'm at least gonna give you the information that I got from the structural engineer and the contractor that we spoke with. So in order to determine the deck capacity, you're gonna have to either talk to somebody who already knows, or you're gonna have to have someone come in and kind of cut into your deck and look at the spacing of the beams. So when we moved in, I think I just happened to come across deck capacity while I was Googling. It wasn't something that I thought about, and I was gardening on a different rooftop deck and thankfully didn't use anything too heavy. But when I was researching it, it talked about the importance of deck capacity. So I contacted a structural engineer, since now we are in our home, to come over, and basically how he explained it was that in order to determine the pounds per square footage, he would have to cut into the ceiling that's below the deck and look at the spacing of the beams. Now, I don't remember exactly like what spacing equals what deck capacity. If I can find any information, I will put that down below. And when he told us that, we were like, okay, he left, we thought about it. We did figure it'd be worth doing because I was going to put some large elevated beds out there. So there were going to be large containers that probably weighed a lot, especially with the soil inside of them. But luckily, the contractor who helped build this house 20 years ago was still in contact with the old owners, and they gave us his information, and he told us that the decks were designed to hold 100 pounds per square foot, which is fantastic. He said kind of the lowest threshold, if you're gonna be adding a lot of heavy things on your deck, is like 60 pounds per square foot. So we were at least 40 pounds per square foot over that. Now, I do have a whole specific video on deck capacity, although I think most of what I'm covering in this video is included in there as well, but I will link it down below just in case. So luckily, we did not have to pay somebody because it would have been at least a couple $100s, and I don't think that included repairing the hole that they had to cut into the ceiling. So if you don't know and you own your home, structural engineer might be the best route to go if you're going to put some heavy containers on it. If you're renting, you might be able to ask the building management company, and hopefully they know how strong the deck was designed to hold. So reach out to them. Now, if you don't know, you don't want to pay someone to come and cut into your ceiling and figure it out, then I would just avoid heavy containers. So stick to things like grow bags, plastic pots. I wouldn't install anything heavy on your deck unless you for sure know the deck capacity. So that's the first thing I would figure out just starting off. Again, use lightweight containers if you don't want to figure it out, but just to be safe, I would definitely recommend that you do. So deck capacity is number one. So that's what I did right before starting. Now let's go into everything else that I didn't do before I started my deck garden. The first thing is staining your deck. So the recommendation for staining is once every few years. Now the deck was like stained before we move in, but I don't know how long. And I just got so excited to start gardening that I kind of put everything out there. So now I'm kind of in a space where if we do get the deck stained or there are any repairs that need to be made, I will have to empty out my raised beds. Once they're empty, they are light enough. I mean, they're not light, but they're light enough that two people, me and my husband, can pick it up and move it. So our strategy, I think, would have to be to do one half of the deck at a time, move the stuff back over, do the other half of the deck, because there's no way we can bring the raised beds. Actually, maybe the ones on the back deck could come and sit inside once they're empty. The ones on the front deck, they're too large and there was no place that we can put them inside. So do keep that in mind if you are gardening on a deck and any repairs need to be made. You're gonna have to figure out what to do with your planters. Now, we're on the 3rd floor, so there's no yard for me to like carry them down the stairs and put them in, because they'd have to go all the way through the house and it just wouldn't work. So I would say at least make sure that you stain your deck right beforehand, right before you start to garden on your deck. That way you have a few years of protection before you have to do any sort of resealing. So I'll take you along and kind of see how that does with my deck and anything that we have to do. I do already have money budgeted for any sort of repairs that we need to make to the deck, because I'm just assuming that with gardening and everything that I have kind of on here and going on, we are probably going to have to fix some portion of it at some point in time. So I do have budget already set aside for that. Now, let's talk about some ways that you can protect your deck from all of the containers that you're going to put on it. The type of container that I would say you need to protect your deck from the most is grow bags. That's because when grow bags, so the material is very porous. When the soil gets wet, the fabric gets wet, and it's basically like leaving a sponge on this wood table for months at a time. And that's not something that you want to do. Now, with all of your containers, I do say it's probably better if you can lift them up off the deck, but 100% definitely do this with grow bags. So I have some things here that I use to lift my containers. There's some that are still outside under containers, so I will just put in images and then link everything down below. But I think most everything I just found on Amazon. So the first thing are just these planter lifts. So you can use these inside or outside. I use all of mine outside because I have saucers for inside. What is great about these, with the grow bags at least, is if I had a grow bag sitting on a, let's say, a plastic saucer, the water is going to drain through the grow bag and then it's just going to be sitting in a pool in the saucer. So with this, there are these squares on it for the water to drain. So the water still does drain through. The grow bag's not sitting in a pool of water, but it gets the grow bag off of the ground, which is great, or off of the wooden deck. So I like to use these. This size works really well. It's maybe about 12 inches in diameter. Works really well under my 5 and 7 gallon grow bags. Anything larger than that, then I use some larger lifts, but I really like these. Now, I did want to mention, I also have these pot feet, but these I don't use for grow bags, because if you use pot feet around the edge of a grow bag, because the material is fabric, so it's very flexible, the center still sags down with the soil in it and it still touches the deck. So while these work really well for like wooden containers or plastic containers or basically anything that holds its form, I haven't found that they work really well for grow bags. So I would go with something that fits all the way under the grow bag and lifts it up off of the deck. Now, I do have a video about how porous containers are, how well draining. So the more porous or the more well draining a container is, that means the more water is hitting your deck or sitting on your deck. The less porous containers, like plastic, that means that the water isn't going to be just sitting on the deck. I mean, some may come out through the drainage hole, but the plastic is protecting the wet soil from sitting on the wood. I do still like to use lifts anyway, just so that the drainage hole is clear. But do keep that in mind, that if you have a lot of well-draining containers, that means that that moisture is going to be sitting on the deck. Now, under my larger grow bags and just larger pots in general, I like to use plant lifts with wheels, because not only does that, again, help raise it off of the deck, but that means I can easily move the containers around. So I'll put in a picture here of what I use for my 30-gallon grow bag. So I have 3 of those. They're all on these stands with wheels. And then I also have my beach plum, which is in a large, I don't think it's a ceramic, maybe like plastic container as well. Again, just for ease of movement, but also protects the deck. And what I like about these is that they are expandable, so you can adjust it based on the size of your pot. For my 30-gallon grow bags, they are set to the largest size, and then for my beach plum tree, they are set to a little bit smaller of a size, but I like that you have the ability to change those. And again, they're not like a solid platform, so water will still drain, but it's not just going to be sitting on the deck like it would in a grow bag. And this is a good time to say, because I do get a question about this, is how does my deck in general drainage? Now, since this is a rooftop deck, it's going to get rain. Even if I didn't have a garden, it's going to get snow. There has to be some sort of drainage mechanism in place, and there is. So basically underneath the planks is the roof, which then tilts and angles towards a gutter. So all of the excess water will run out through the gutter that goes underneath our deck. So there is a drainage system set up. Now, another thing I would have done differently if I could go back in time, and if I ever do have to replace any of my raised beds, I will do this, is I would prefer to use raised beds, even if the beds themselves are made of wood, where the legs are actually metal. Or if you're looking for an elevated bed made of plastic, that'll work too. But plastic and metal are going to be less porous than wood. Now you can decrease the porousness of the wood by treating it, but in general, wood's going to hold more moisture than steel or plastic would. And since the deck is also wood, you have two materials sitting on top of each other that can hold that moisture. So I would go back and maybe choose an elevated bed where the legs, again, are made of plastic or metal, or the whole bed themselves is made of plastic. Even though I like the look of wood better, I think that's just something I would do differently. I would probably go for wooden raised bed, metal legs, and just feel a little bit better that I'm not having wood sitting right on top of wood. Now, some other tips are to move your planters around regularly. So if they're not sitting in the same spot the entire gardening season, that's going to allow the places where it's sitting to kind of get some air, get some sunlight when you move them around. But practically, that's probably not what a lot of us are doing. So that's why it is important to get them lifted off of the deck. Also, if you are going to move any of your containers, pick them up, don't drag them. I found that out very quickly in the first season of gardening here when I had a grow bag sitting on the ground on the deck. I had a tomato cage in the grow bag, and again, because it's fabric, I didn't realize that the bottom of the cage was poking through the grow bag. So I dragged the grow bag, and when I did that, it scratched the deck. So keep that in mind, and if you can, pick things up and set them down instead of dragging them on your deck. And if it's something that's too heavy to lift, put it on wheels, especially before you fill the containers with soil. A lot of the time, it's not the container itself that's going to add a lot of weight to your deck, but once you put in the soil, once you have plants growing, and once that soil is wet, that is going to add up pretty quickly. So those are just some of my tips. Again, most of these I learned after I started, and I wish I would implement them all before I had started, but this is where we are right now. So let me know if you have any questions down below. Let me know if there are any other tips that you have as well for deck protection. But again, I feel like this topic isn't the most exciting topic, but I do feel like it's a very important topic. Oh, before I go, just related to deck gardening, I want to show you something I just got. It's this painting. So this is from an artist. Her name is Sarah Glepker, I think is how you pronounce her last name. But when we were at the Lilac Festival in Mackinac last June, I posted some photos from there. She is an artist. I don't think she lives in Mackinac, but she goes there and paints. And she asked if she could use some of my photos, and I was like, of course, for her painting. And then she was going through my Instagram and asked if she could paint one of the pictures of my garden. And I was like, obviously, yes. So she did that, and then she shared it with me online when she was done, and it was for sale on her website. And of course, I'm going to get the painting of my own garden on the website. So she wasn't expecting that, but I definitely went ahead and got this for myself, because how cool is that? To have a painting of your own garden. So I wanted to show this off. I'll list her Instagram and website down below, but I absolutely love this. The garden does not look like this right now. I can't wait till it does again. So that's everything for this video. Again, any questions or any tips, list them down below. I'll have all of the stuff that I use for deck protection also listed down there, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.